Hey everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Enter and Gremlin. We have a very exciting, very special episode for you today. Today, we are going to be getting that engine to turn over. At least I hope, because at the time of filming this, we haven't actually tried to do it yet. So, fingers crossed. Stay tuned. Alright, I don't know if you guys can see me or not. So we're going to start working on getting the engine to turn over now that the cylinders have finally been unseized. And we're going to take advantage of the head being off while it's down here. And that's going to be particularly with respect to the starter. So the starter, I know, looking back through the maintenance records, was replaced. But there are two different points that I am concerned with. The first is the power supply. And the second is the ground wire. Now the power supply looks like it's in great shape. So I'm probably just going to unbolt it, clean off the terminal ring, and call it good. However, the ground wire, some of the cabling has just worn away over time. There's a lot of grease and stuff here. I don't know how well it's actually going to carry a current. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the resistance and the current capability of this wire with a voltmeter. And I'm going to make sure that this is capable of drawing the current, or transferring, I should say, the current that we need back to ground via the chassis back to the battery without frying, because that's the last thing I need right now. However, even if it does fry, this is a very simple connection. It just goes from here to a terminal point in the firewall. So I'm going to get cracking on getting the voltmeter and making sure that the connections are all good. All right, I got my voltmeter. That's the red terminal. Alright, so I'm not reading a whole lot of resistance. I'm only reading about 0.01 ohms. So that's good. That means that there's probably not too much to worry about. However, I am going to do a quick jump of the relay, which is over here, which I will show you in just a second. I will bypass the relay to make sure that the starter turns. That'll also let it drive the cylinders a little bit. So let's move on to that next. Now, in order to test the starter with an actual power supply, I'm going to need two things. I'm going to need a battery and luck. Not really so much luck, just so much know-how. So over here is where the battery used to live. Now I've got the AC compressor here in the way. I'll move it back out of the way, but I'm going to go pillage a battery from my Subaru real quick that I know is good and has the can provide enough cold cranking amps to the starter, and put it back here. And I'm going to hook up the ground to it. I'm not going to hook up the live. And then what you see right here, this is actually the starter relay. Now this looks a lot different than relays we know today because, again, it's 1968, technology was not as good, and these were not as compact. So what you have here are the relay ignition switches that are connected to the ignition hole, or ignition hole, the actual ignition inside that you use with a key. I'm loopy at this point. And what those do is those activate the relay in here to allow large amounts of current from the battery directly to the starter. And the wire that goes to the starter is this one right here, which connects to this node. This side is the side that connects to the battery. Now, if you want to be clever and jumpstart one of these vehicles without needing the key, you simply bypass this relay and provide power directly from the battery to the starter. Problem solved. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to get the battery, I'm going to hook up the ground so that it has a return path, and then I'm going to start tapping it off to make sure that we have a good connection, and that the starter doesn't burn out and the starter's still good and the cylinders are running. So that'll be really cool to see that running, and we'll be able to see the pistons going up and down. All right, so the starter works. I bypassed the solenoid, and I've actually plugged it up to a battery now, and I'm going to actually use the ignition, make sure that this relay is good. So here goes nothing. You should, now the motor is still not fully lubricated, so it'll only spit for a short while before the friction of the motor slows it down. But should see something really cool. 3, 2, 1. Take 2. I swear it did it just a minute ago. Take 3. God damn it. Take 4. Damn it. Take 5. God damn it. Take 6. Forget it. Okay. Just trying to get the cylinders to turn with the starter, but I don't think the battery's got quite enough. That's okay though. I'm gonna start putting the motor back together. All right, so the engine's all put back together now. Thanks to all the handy labeling that I mentioned beforehand, it literally took me 5 minutes to put this all back together once I got the head bolted back on. I mean, super easy. So do yourself a favor and label everything. Now, I'm not worrying about the throttle linkage to get it to turn over this time. And that's because, well, I'm going to be doing it by hand because I'm going to be close by and I'm going to be spraying ether into the carburetor to get into the cylinders. We are going to be running a jumper system to this battery to give it a little extra cold cranking amps to help that starter give it the power that it needs to turn those cylinders. But before we start spraying ether into there, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pull one of the spark plugs and I'm going to check for spark, because without spark we could sit here all day and turn the motor over and it will never ever turn on, because you need 3 things. You need air, fuel, and spark. So yeah, we're going to test for spark first and then we're going to see if we can get it to turn over. So, as always, fingers crossed.
2 hours later.
So we checked another spark plug. We checked spark plug 3 to check for any spark, just to make sure that there wasn't a problem with the wire or the plug itself. And lo and behold, no spark out of plug 3. So that means we got to backtrack it to the distributor and the coil. Now, we took the distributor cap off and we were checking the contact points for any sign of electrical contact. Diddly squat. So that means that potentially we're dealing with a bad connection from the coil to the distributor cap, we're dealing with a bad condenser, or we're dealing with a bad coil, or maybe there's a harness in between. And looking a little bit closer, let's see if I can get here. So I took the harnesses off of the coil, and as you might or might not be able to see, this guy is rusted to hell. And he's starting to get frayed here. I highly doubt that this thing was able to transmit any current whatsoever the way it's all corroded. This other wire that supplies the primary current to it, you know, it is rusted, but it's not the worst I've seen. So I'm going to clean it up a little bit, create some fresh new contact surfaces for it, and I'll probably redo a connection for this guy right here. I'll probably cut it short, maybe use a ring terminal just as a short-term solution gap, because we're not going to be using this on the road. We just want it to turn over once before we send it to the engine shop, and then we'll continue testing from there. Okay, so after a lot of diagnosing around with a voltmeter, I do believe that we have finally solved the mystery of why there is no spark, and that is there was no voltage getting to the coil. Now what I have here is the original coil that was installed on the engine. I did find an additional coil in the trunk, if you recall from the episode where I was cleaning out the trunk. We've got an old coil, and so I've replaced it with that one. This one had some pretty bad corrosion on the contact points on the terminals, so you know, high likelihood that it was no good. It might have still worked, but I decided to go with the one that was in the trunk. It looked new, like it had never even been used other than some mild surface rust. The way that we were able to determine that there was no voltage getting to the coil was, you know, after putting the voltmeter to different sections of the circuit. You know, you've got the primary relay for the starter over there, the starter itself, the coil, the distributor. We determined that when we had the key turned to the coil and or ignition portion, that we weren't getting any voltage to the coil, which means that we have a broken circuit somewhere inside the dash. And now I have removed the dash, and I was looking for an obvious broken wire in there. Didn't find it. So in order to save time, we're going to cheat a little bit. We are going to bypass that whole system to power the coil, which is okay so long as you remember to turn it off. Otherwise, you risk potentially burning out your coil. So I'm going to create a jumper wire from the positive terminal of the battery to the positive terminal of the coil, and that will allow us to generate spark. And that's what we're going to test first. And if we get spark, we're probably going to jump straight ahead into trying to get the motor to turn over. So stay tuned. Happy New Year's Day, everybody. It is a beautiful, frigid 7 degrees outside here in Denver, Colorado. But you know what? We've got the heaters in here running, so it's a nice, balmy 46 inside the garage. So last night did some testing, and this morning did some additional testing to track down the right reason why we were not getting spark. So we started with the plugs themselves and making sure, seeing if we were getting any spark. We tested multiple plugs to make sure that we didn't have a bad plug. When we found out that we didn't have any spark to any of the plugs, we were tracing it back to the distributor and to the coil and to the primary ignition circuit. So what we did after that to kind of, step by step, work it backwards as you're supposed to, made sure that the contact points on the distributor were still good. There was a little bit of corrosion, but not too much. We brushed that off. And then checked the connections on the coil. And then we found on the ground side of the coil, now this is an old coil that was in the trunk. It's not the actual coil. It was extremely rusted and corroded. And I highly doubt that it was producing any current. So what I did is I created a new terminal for the coil. I just used a simple ring terminal and crimped that on as the new connection. Then this morning did some testing with the voltmeter to make sure that the primary ignition circuit, which is back there, was providing a signal to the coil, which it was, which is great. And then move forward to make sure that the next one was providing signal to the distributor, which then moves on to the condenser, and that was performing a connection as well. And then I moved on to the actual spark plug wire, which sends the high voltage signal to the distributor, and I hooked it up to an actual spark plug and grounded it against the vehicle on the threads, and had a friend turn over the vehicle, and I was not getting any spark. So that leads me to believe that we have a problem with the coil. It's not actually generating any current. I double checked that with the voltmeter, had him turn over the car, and was getting a minimal voltage increase on the outlet of the coil. So I'm going to run another test or two, and then I'm going to go get a replacement coil for about $35, throw it on there, and then we should be good to go. But you never know, things could always go wrong, but we're getting there. We're getting closer. I have a good feeling today's going to be the day. Okay, so we bypassed the ignition circuit by taking a jumper wire from the relay coil, technically the battery, to the coil itself directly, so that whatever short was happening in there wasn't happening anymore, and we were able to get power. However, still could not get spark for the life of me. I do not know why, but so help me, we will make this work. And so we're going back to basics. So over here, what I've done is I have pulled the distributor, being very careful to make sure that I marked where the housing was aligned with the block, and where the point actually was. Sorry, can't remember what this is called. Being very careful to make sure that I marked where it was located with respect to the actual breaker points, and where the housing was located with respect to the block, so that when we go to put it back in, it still has the correct timing, we don't have misfire, and we don't damage our engine by accident when we try and get it to run, and it will actually turn over. So after pulling the distributor housing, what I did is I came in here, and if you look at the distributor housing, there's these two screws, and they are what hold the points in place. That is this snappy ring right here. And those points come open as the distributor turns because it has a hex-shaped lobe with 6 sides on it. So because we have 6 cylinders, in an 8-cylinder, a V8, you would eventually have a... what are you doing? So in an 8-cylinder engine, you would have 8 lobes, you know, timing with the 8 cylinders. So you can see it's actually moving right here. So what I did is I aligned the lobe with its furthest most point, and then I used feeler gauges to gap it after cleaning the points with a flat file, to ensure that they were set to their correct gap, which in this case is like 20 to 25 thousandths. So after doing that, I pulled the battery, brought it over here to the bench, put this guy in the vise. I have a ground going from the distributor housing and the vise, which you can think of as the engine block, going back to the negative terminal of the battery. I have the negative terminal of the coil going to the distributor housing, which then goes to the points, which is what causes the current to break inside the coil. The magnetic fields collapse and create the voltage spike, which then comes out through the main ignition wire. So, in theory, all I have to do is take this wire, plug it to the positive end of the coil, and then spin this drill, which will simulate the cam turning in the engine as the engine is running. That will create the collapsing magnetic fields that creates the voltage spike, which will then arc from here to the block, which is grounded. So it has a complete path. If everything is working as it should, we'll have a spark, and we'll know that everything with this portion of the circuit is correct. And if we still don't get spark when we put it back in, it's with the distributor cap, and that'll be the final hurdle. So, without further ado, we are live. That'll be fine. Ha! Ha! Okay, side note, don't touch the rest of the system. When you do that, you will get a nasty shock, as I just found out. So, take 2. Just be careful not to touch. Make sure all the wires are not touching. Take 2. Ah! Alright, so without further ado, we should see an arc going to the quote-unquote engine block. Aha! Alright, so that means we got a spark. I'm going to disconnect this so that I don't accidentally burn up the coil. Woo! Alright, so got a spark. Everything with this portion of the system works. That means we should get a spark to a spark plug. If we do not, we know it's in the distributor cap, and that is easy to fix and diagnose. So on to the next step. All right, the time has come. We did the bench test, and after a few unfortunate sequences of shocking myself with 20,000 volts from the ignition coil, safety first kids, put it all back into the vehicle with the new coil. We have air, we have fuel, we have spark, all 3 things you need to have combustion, so we are ready. I have my safety glasses on, my handy dandy apron, and a fire extinguisher on standby. Remember, whenever you're starting an engine up, always make sure that you have the right protective gear. We've also got the garage opened up, so any fumes from the exhaust that show up in here can vacate safely out of the vehicle. I know I've said this 1,000 times up till now over the past couple of months, and hope springs eternal, but we're finally gonna get the car to start and turn over, so fingers crossed. It's dying out. Damn it! It was so close! So after about a month of working on this motor and going through everything and making content, and I swear this is the last time, trying to get it to turn over, we had to call it quits. And it's not because we wanted to, but the fact is, you know, after spending a month of working on this engine, we have other things on this car that we want to get to and that we want to keep making content for, and we want to keep making progress for. And there's so many different things that we're excited to be working on and show you guys. So it's a bummer that we couldn't get it to turn over and start for the very first time, but we are still going to get to do that as part of the performance motor build. Remember, we were trying to get this thing to start as is. You know, this is without, you know, doing any machining work to the block car, without doing any work on the components, really, just minor stuff that you can do in your garage. And that was really the point of trying to get this motor to start, is to show you kind of the basic steps that you can take when you're restoring an older vehicle if you want to try and use the motor as is. So, you know, ultimately, I hope you guys learned something. You found this this video and every video that we've done to date now, you know, informative and useful. And you know what? If there is a question that you guys still have that is lingering and you didn't think we answered or talked about very good, let us know. Send us a message and we will either try and answer you directly, or if we think it's something that's worthy enough to make content for, we'll go back and revisit the topic and probably do something like a short. So please don't hesitate to send us your questions or your concerns. But, you know, it's a bummer that we have to move on from trying to get the motor to start. We've tried our darndest, but that's okay because there's still so many great things that we're getting ready to do for this car. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching. And please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And check us out on Instagram at Engine Gremlin 6. You can also find us on Twitter at Engine Gremlin. Like I said, thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are the reason we make this content. And I will see you guys next time.